Alright everyone, I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to start with my game review. Today's featured independent video game is Heroes of Hammerwatch 2. It's boring as hell. I recently reviewed a game called Dark Deity 2, which, surprise surprise, is a sequel to Dark Deity. Previously, I described the first game as a simple meal well made. Now that the sequel is out in full and I've had time to play it more thoroughly, I can say that Dark Deity 2 isn't quite as simple as I originally thought, but it's still good. And the thing I want to get across to people is that a simple story is not the same as a boring story, and these two games are a prime example of why. First, I'm sure at some point you've all heard of a thing described as elegant in its simplicity. This is basically a way of saying that a thing is going to function more easily when it doesn't have unnecessary bells and whistles. You might think of a story or other work of fiction as a kind of machine. The more moving parts it has, the more attention needs to be applied to each detail in order for it to work. Work, in this case, means telling an entertaining story, or simply providing a gamer with a fun and engaging experience. This doesn't mean complications are necessarily bad, but it's like a machine that requires more maintenance to run properly. It takes time and effort to make a more complicated world with a deeper background lore, or to build your own political backdrop in your fantasy setting. In terms of a video game, the mechanics you throw at the player are another set of moving parts. You can make a good game with lots of mechanics by providing a decent tutorial, provided that each mechanic you add either adds something of value to the experience, or can be ignored. For example, if you're playing an Elder Scrolls game, it's pretty much a joke at this point that the stealth archer builds are completely overpowered. A player can make a character like that and completely ignore the skill set of a melee fighter or a mage. But if you want to roleplay as a Breton woman who beats Daedra to death with her fists, you can do that. You can ignore the mechanics of archery combat altogether. These are completely optional. Heroes of Hammerwatch 2 features a variety of mechanics that are not necessarily excessive, but they're not optional either. For example, you have to do town construction and management in a game where you initially just thought you were signing up for a bog-standard hack and slash. And for the record, the first Heroes of Hammerwatch was a bog-standard hack and slash. Conversely, Dark Deity and its sequel does two things really well. One, it plays like a turn-based strategy akin to Fire Emblem, and it has really likable characters. By which I mean the characters are not overly complex, but still incredibly relatable. In fact, I cannot recommend Dark Deity enough as a case study of how to make a simple meal well made. The sequel, again, has some more nuances than the first, but the characters are still handled really well. And between them and the gameplay, that's all you really need for an enjoyable turn-based strategy game experience. One of the reasons why complicated media can become boring is because they get bogged down with these unnecessary complications that draw the audience out of the story altogether. Creators can get so wrapped up in all the different things they want to throw into their work that they forget to make sure that each thing actually, well, works. The key to remember is this. A story being simple or complex is an intellectual matter, but a story being entertaining or boring is an emotional one. A story becomes boring when it doesn't provide the audience with any emotional fulfillment, and it's not hard to see how a complicated story can fail to do that. Complexities in a story can amplify the emotional experience, but they can just as easily ruin it by clogging up the whole thing. And this is actually one of Alfred Hitchcock's rules of movie making. It doesn't matter what the actual content of your story is, it must give the audience the emotional experience they're looking for. Hitchcock captured this perfectly with his bomb under the table analogy, where he explains that if you show a scene where people are talking about baseball around a table for 5 minutes, it's boring. And then if a bomb goes off under the table, you get a few seconds of surprise. And you only get the surprise if the audience doesn't know that the bomb is there. It relies on the intellectual shock of not knowing, as a matter of fact, that there is a bomb that will explode before it goes off. There could be clues to the bomb being there, and the audience could put those clues together and solve the mystery, but that is a purely intellectual process. Now, if you tell the audience ahead of time that there is a bomb under the table, the whole scene changes. Instead of being a boring scene with people talking about baseball, suddenly the conversation is very intense, and the audience is hanging on to every word, wondering what's going to happen. Is the bomb going to go off? Hitchcock says that it never should, but I disagree. The bomb could explode after the characters get up for whatever reason and leave the room. The bomb could go off and turn out to be full of poisonous gas, and the suspense is in seeing who gets out of the scene alive and how. Suspense, as Hitchcock would describe it, is an emotional process, while mystery is a logical one. Something I've noticed in a lot of media today is the desire to subvert expectations, even at the cost of ruining the story. This is why almost every Disney villain nowadays has to be a twist villain. Gone are the days where the bad guy just shows up in a room and makes it obvious that he's an intimidating force that can cast a shadow over the entire world. Because villains like Maleficent, or Jafar, or even Yzma weren't designed to surprise the audience. They were designed for suspense. The effect they have on the viewer is emotional, not intellectual, which is why they're so fun to watch. But with modern films and television, it seems like everyone is trying to subvert our expectations with twist villains. And while some of them work, the ones that do are usually more of an accident than anything deliberate on the part of the creators. You've got King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph, who serves as a nice foil to Ralph with them both being dissatisfied in their roles in their respective games, and you've got Ernesto de la Cruz from Coco, who manages to be one of the most hateable villains in recent Disney history, which is not saying a lot. And not to put too fine a point on it, but most people never even watched Coco. Now, in terms of a video game, the goal should be to capture that emotional engagement around things like character writing, the gameplay experience, the plot, or the world building. Generally, if you can get two of those in a single game, it's likely to be a hit. You might have noticed that most of the successful games in the indie scene have done at least 2 or 3 of these things. For example, A Hat in Time has a fun gameplay experience where you get to bounce on penguins and beat up the mafia with an umbrella, a fun setting in every level, and some really excellent and memorable characters. No one's going to forget about the Snatcher anytime soon. Then you have Amori, which doesn't have anything memorable about its gameplay, but both the characters and the plot are an emotional roller coaster, all tied together with the theme of conquering your own demons versus hiding away in your own headspace. Compare that to Heroes of Hammerwatch 2, which doesn't have anything stellar about the gameplay, has no characters with any real depth, doesn't really do anything more with the world building, and has a generic plot for the first 40 minutes. It might have more later on, but if you can't give me something to work with in the first half hour of a game, I don't care what you have hidden an hour of gameplay later. Now, there's one more thing I want to talk about regarding how to keep a story from becoming boring. Mood whiplash. Mood whiplash is when the tone of a story changes abruptly. You start out with a silly, funny story, and then something dark and tragic happens. Or maybe you're watching a dramatic action movie, and they stop the drama to have a whimsical comedic chase sequence. And this is a bit of a tangent, because the example I'm going to go over isn't exactly simple, but mood whiplash usually can't happen unless a story is complicated enough to have sudden changes in tone. A great example of a show that handles whiplash incredibly well is, of course, Adventure Time. The entire series is more or less built on the concept, where everything looks ridiculous, there's literally a kingdom made out of candy, and the reason why the world is full of crazy stuff that looks like nonsense is because it's set in a post-nuclear apocalyptic version of Earth that literally has a hole blown in it. There's an episode about Finn and Jake trying to set the Ice King, the biggest weirdo in the land of Ooo who's been living in their home ever since they burned down his castle, on a play date with Abracadaniel, the Wizard of Rainbows, whose head is shaped like, well, just look at it. Everything is funny, there's lots of lowbrow comedy, and then the Ice King reads an inscription on Finn's sword and summons a demon from another dimension, who abducts Jake and takes him back to his creepy world. And then the wizards just bail on Finn, holding his broken sword and having lost his best friend/brother. The key to this kind of mood whiplash is that, while there is a logical chain of events behind it, and there's a message about the importance of kicking people out of your home after they've overstayed their welcome, the focus is still on the emotional impact of the story. Every time you've seen a story where people complained about the mood whiplash, I guarantee you that there was something missing from this formula. Either they forgot to make sure that we cared about the characters and their struggle, or they forgot to make a logical chain of events that would cause the shift in tone and make it feel like it wasn't forced. And once people feel like the tone shift is forced, and they can see the hand of the author manipulating the story, the suspension of disbelief is broken, and boredom is usually sure to follow. That's about all I have to say about today's topic, and I think I've made my stance on today's featured game clear, but I have one last announcement. Currently, I'm still trying to set up audiobooks for my fantasy series, Heroes of Jinan, but Amazon has made it clear that getting me in contact with the right narrator is not high on their priority list. So, still trying to figure that out, and I'm taking suggestions if anyone has any. I'm not too happy with the sound of my own voice, and I'm not willing to charge people money to hear me read them a book for 15 hours. And on top of all that, I'm also trying to write the next book while juggling everything else. That's all I have for you today. Hit that like and subscribe button, remember to click that bell, and thank you all, and goodbye.